start in about 1 minute. So if you'd like to get the handouts for today's session, they're on the website, and the website link is in front of you. Let's see. Just for everybody's information, our previous webinars are also recorded, and the recordings are on our website, so you are free to listen to those recordings if you weren't able to stay for the whole recording or if you missed any of the other webinars that you might have been interested in. I will be starting right now. Hi, this is Mercedes Byrne-Klug with the School of Social Work at the University of Iowa. I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar. Our handouts for today on our Nursing Home Social Work Network website, and you can just Google the University of Iowa School of Social Work and you can find it from there. Handouts are actually 6 slides per page of today's presentation if you'd like to download that and go along with it. For folks who've registered for this live webinar, we'll be sending you via email a PDF certificate of attendance just indicating that you were part of today's session and how many minutes you were logged on. In some states, those can be used for CEUs, but not in all states. So that'll be up to you to figure out whether or not your state accepts it, the certificate of attendance. I mentioned before that this is the live session, but it's also being recorded, and our game plan is to post the recording of today's session within 24 hours on the website. You can send questions to me. I'm the who's monitoring the chat box or the Q&A box anytime during the session, although we will have a specific time for our speakers to address questions at the end of the session. Our webinar lasts about an hour, so the speakers will talk until the top of the next hour, and then we'll leave an additional 15 minutes for questions or comments. So feel free to submit your questions, and then I will go through the questions and pose them to our speakers, and also read the questions out loud so that everybody in the audience can hear what the question is. I'd like to introduce our co-host, Robert Conley. Bob Conley's been a social worker for many years. He has 20 years of experience at the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, and in fact, Bob was the project officer for the MDS 3.0 and has experience as a nursing home social worker from before his time at the CMS, and he's a leader of this webinar project. So I'll just hand it over to Bob just to introduce himself, and we'll probably hear from Bob at the end of the session as well.
Okay, thanks, Merce, and I'm really excited that we're going to have a presentation on research because the ES and many best practices come out of research. So the topic today is participation in independent or collaborative research projects. I'm especially pleased to have Sheryl Zimmerman on because she was on the expert panel, the only social worker who was guiding the validation study that she and I worked on and did a great job. She's joined by Elsie Norton and Kim Broucksou, and both are working in a residential treatment facility, CCRC, in North Carolina. I've been working closely with Sheryl. So I'll turn it over to Sheryl. Thanks.
Cheryl's getting ready. I did just open up a poll asking where they work. So if you want to go ahead and complete the poll, you have about 4 minutes, and then we'll read the results when the poll comes in. But Sheryl, thank you.
Hi, Sheryl Zimmerman. I'm not sure whether Bob finished. Our phone had gotten disconnected. Can you hear?
I can hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry. I suspect Bob's introduction is done. Shall we just continue?
Yeah, I just put up a poll for our audience members to let us know what setting they work in. And so I will probably interrupt you after you introduce yourself when the poll closes in about 4 minutes and let you know where our audience comes from. But right now, we're ready for you to advance the slides and continue.
Okay, thank you. And again, I apologize for that less than smooth beginning. Our phone line went dead right about when we were talking. All right. Well, hello, everyone. This is Sheryl Zimmerman, and on behalf of Elsie, Norton, Kim Broucksou, and myself, we are very pleased to be here to talk with you about participation in independent or collaborative research projects. Our understanding is that most of you are in the trenches providing social services and nursing homes right at the front line. So the question is, why are you even interested in this topic? And as we did hear Bob start to say, it's presumably because you know that participation in research is considered best practice. Here's a list of best practices. It's listed, but certainly it's not least. I myself have got a bachelor's in social work and a master's in social work, and I went ahead and got a doctoral degree in social work because I wanted to spend my career better understanding best practices and how to implement best practices in long-term care settings and a host of other settings. And currently I'm on the faculty in the School of Social Work in the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. I will be talking about the research perspective today. After I do that, my colleague Elsie Norton will discuss the organizational perspective, meaning what it means to do, meaning what one has to consider if research is going to be done in a long-term care organization. As you see, Elsie is the VP and Chief Operating Officer of Meadows, which is a continuing care retirement community in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. That's why we're especially interested in understanding the position of the people who are listening today. And after Elsie talks about the organizational perspective, Kim Broucksou is going to dig even deeper and talk about what it really means to be implementing research projects and what you need to think about when you're doing so. As you see here, Kim is also a social worker, and she's the cognitive care director at Carolina Meadows CCRC. Why is participating in research considered a best practice? In large part, it's because there's a lot we can learn from research. Let me sensitize you to some of the issues here. Here's a question for you to consider. In the 22 years between 1990 and 2012, how many studies do you think were conducted in the U.S. about care and outcomes for people with dementia who reside in nursing homes or other residential long-term care settings and their family caregivers? So think it yourself whether you think, well, maybe there's been about 30 a year, so maybe a little less than 700 studies, or perhaps more than that and 3,000 studies, 140 a year, or could it even be even more than that and more than 6,000 studies a year? Well, the reality is that indeed there has been a lot of research done in this area and in other areas, of course, but I just want to talk today about this area as we're going to talk about some of the evidence in it. And a lot of this research is very important to inform your practices, to inform family members, to inform other staff what needs to provide best practices. So there's been 6,209 studies done in these 22 years. Here's another question to think about. How many studies do you suppose change the standard of care? You think most of them, or half of them, or essentially none? Indeed, it really is. One study has pretty much been identified as having changed the standard of care in this area in long-term care. And the question is, why is that? And what you're going to see is because this research isn't getting into your hands and it's not informing the work you do in most cases or the work that's being done in nursing homes or other long-term care settings. And it happens. Because to change the standard of care, any best practices, they have to reach the intended audience. And I'm guessing that very few of you who are listening today know anything, or certainly not very much, about the 6,209 studies that have been conducted. To change the standard of care, they also have to be effective in achieving outcomes. They have to be adopted as standard practice. And, of course, that's not always under your control. And it's not easy to change what is standard practice. They have to be implemented as intended. implemented, which also isn't necessarily under your control. There's a lot of staff members involved and administrative concerns, as we're going to talk about. And of course, they also have to be maintained over time. An interesting thing to think about is to consider, in the best possible world, how much reach can our best practices actually have? I think that, be realistic, that if 50% of social workers have learned about and know about some best practice, then that means that maybe, at best, 50% of the population can benefit from it. But if every resident benefits from every intervention or new practice we do, so maybe half of them would benefit, and now we've said, well, maybe 25% of the population overall is going to benefit. Then nursing homes are actually going to adopt it. Well, maybe half, and that's down to affecting 12% of the population. But we don't get implemented as intended, so we've now affected 6%, and then things change over time and don't get maintained. So even in this wonderful best position, with the best practice that has been studied and promoted and disseminated, we might think that we're going to have a benefit to 3% of the people. And that is where you come in, and that's also why we really need to think about testing and implementing best practices in a different way. Re-aim, if you will. At this point, even further, by asking you what you think the average lag time is between research evidence being disseminated and it being put into practice. So the best evidence, and now really want to change the field, happened with that one study I was referring to. So 3 years, 10 years, or 17 years. Well, kind of get in the groove of the way these answers are going, you might anticipate that indeed it's 17 years. And a social worker who's committed her career to doing research, speaking of, this is really pretty discouraging. And it speaks to the fact why we really need to better empower the people who use the research and who can help conduct the proper research to be able to do that. Because I was thinking about my own personal timeline. I thought about what that 17 years would mean to someone doing social work research. Finish a master's degree by year 24, get clinical experience for a few years, have about 5 years of research training, get a job, get some pilot funding, and then do a research grant by this time, maybe 35 years old. Takes a few years to do that project, disseminate the results. Now you're 38 years old. Now, ultimately, you really want to change practice and do a large study and let a lot of people know about it. You can maybe get that grant by the time you're 40, 5-year study, disseminate the results, and you add 17 years on, and there's pretty much a person's research career. It's really an entire lifetime. So if someone, those of us who are especially focused on promoting research to inform practices, it really requires a collaboration. That's where you come in. And this is why we now talk about two different models, two different research models. One is evidence-based practice, where it's practice that implements evidence, which is probably what you most think of when you think about involvement in research. But there's also practice-based evidence, which is evidence that is built from practice. And I'll talk about both of those. First, I'll start with evidence-based practice, which we've been talking about in the field of social work since the early 2000s. Written here, I think this was in 2003, where it was first recognized that the scientific literature relevant to social work practice has grown expansively in recent years. Evidence-based practice is a new paradigm that promotes more effective social interventions by encouraging the conscientious, judicious, and explicit use of best available scientific evidence in professional decision-making. So this is back in the early 2000s. We've been talking about having evidence to inform our practices. The real issue is, are we actually doing that? So, for example, about what the evidence is, I'm going to show you some of the strongest evidence from those 6,209 studies that I mentioned that deal with best practices in long-term care for people with dementia. But we won't be here till midnight. I've got the results all on the next 5 slides. And what happened here is that this study that looked at all of those 6,000 studies that had been done grouped the evidence into organizational characteristics, structures of care, and processes of care to examine what really do we know about best practices in long-term care for people with dementia. Within organizational characteristics, one key question that most people ask is thinking about whether it's better to live in a nursing home or assisted living setting if someone has dementia. There's a fair number of studies in this area, and it's really important to stress that the overall finding of the majority of these studies is that it does not matter. If you compare similar people who are living in a nursing home and assisted living setting, at the end of the day, they end up faring just as well, including whether they get new illnesses. Overall, very little difference in terms of outcomes, including quality of life. There is a few differences, such as hospitalization. People in assisted living who have mild dementia are more likely to be hospitalized than people in nursing homes. Now, that certainly makes sense because there's less nursing present in assisted living. But in nursing homes also, for residents who are dying, there does tend to be more restraint use in dying residents. So, the overall takeaway point, which is important to understand if you're conferring and consulting with family members, is other things being equal, there's no benefit nor detriment to one versus the other. And the second key question people ask in this area is whether it's better to reside in a special care unit or not. And there are a lot of studies in this area as well. Overall, the data say there's little difference in terms of outcomes whether people reside in special care units or don't reside in special care units. Now, I want to suggest that there are not some wonderful special care units where absolutely better outcomes are achieved. The point here is that overall what has been found is it's not where people live, it's the best practices that are happening within those settings. There are differences that have been noticed where nursing homes, people in special care, there's less morbidity and less hospitalization, which of course is a good thing for people with advanced dementia, and assisted living, more functional decline. But again, overall, no big difference. Next to the structures of care, the strongest studies in this area have looked at the use of light to treat depression and sleep quality. Some of you might know about light boxes or have seen the use of light boxes or know that some people use light to treat seasonal affective disorder. So the findings for people with dementia here are pretty interesting. What you see is that for the treatment of depression, bright light, females do have less depressive symptoms if they receive bright light therapy. Men actually have more depressive symptoms, and also sleep quality is better for some people, but not for everyone. It really depends on the pattern of their disrupted sleep. So the takeaway message from this is that the treatment, when it comes to this structure of care, really needs to be individualized for the person. Another structure of care that's been examined is the use of specialized workers versus universal workers. And you probably know many people have been promoting the use of universal workers to promote consistent care. But there is some indication that quality of life can actually be better with the use of specialized workers. So if one looks at the actual data, you can see that their quality of life scores are better. The jury is still out whether that actually translates to a clinical difference, however. Last area to look at about evidence for best practices in long-term care for people with dementia is those processes of care. And these are the types of things that are perhaps more relevant to some of your own clinical practice. There's 7 of them overall, and you see 4 on this first slide. One is functional skill training, and there's good evidence that if functional skill training is provided, and this doesn't mean rehab, this means every direct care provider is helping to improve function. To improve creative expression storytelling, alertness is better, somewhat better, but there's also been found that there's some negative effects, behavioral symptoms, anxiety, or sadness, which again gets to speak about if for any interventions that we do, they really do need to be personalized. Validation therapy has got some good outcomes and some bad outcomes, but better and worse in terms of aggression, depending on where the data are coming from to measure it, and non-aggressive behaviors actually get worse. And encouraging activity involvement. Quality of life has been found to be statistically, but again, not yet known whether it is clinically significantly better. And the last 3 processes of care are here. The strong data of all the data talk about the benefits of pleasant sensory stimulation. This is things like soothing sounds, massage, or food. And they do show that people do evidence less agitation. visualizing care for discomfort or behavioral symptoms, and also person-centered showering and bathing result in better outcomes. The latter findings are very consistent with the whole focus on person-centered care that's now driving all of our health care. So I said that only one study in this area has actually changed the standard of care. I'm not sure if you know which one it is of the ones that I just spoke about. This one. This is Bathing Without a Battle, which some of you might be familiar with. It's become widely adopted across the country. It's become an example of nursing home culture change, and many surveyors consider it to be a best practice. The focus of today's webinar is not to dig into all of the actual evidence. So if you want additional information about this, and I would encourage you to look in terms of what has been found. What you see here is the systematic review that has been done, and all of the studies are summarized there. Information about Bathing Without a Battle is easily available at this website, bathingwithoutabattle.unc.edu. Keep in mind that we do want to do evidence-based practice. The point still exists that much of what has been developed by researchers has not made its way into practice, and that is where practice-based evidence comes in. The challenge with evidence-based interventions is that often when these interventions are developed outside of the reality of the care setting, they end up needing more resources than are realistic, or they rely on staff to have training and supervision that is not realistic, or they require an intensive time commitment on the staff, or not easily sustained over time. Because these aren't usually designed for impact. They're designed for impact and not for implementation. What ends up happening is that the very reason that people have chosen to implement some of these evidence-based practices can actually be thwarted. So that's where practice-based evidence comes in, and that's the second model of research involvement. In terms for evidence-based practice, if you've heard of this, it's also community-based participatory research, or action research. This looks like in practice. We talk about it being a marriage between practice, policy, and research that seeks to address practical problems through community collaboration, employing systematic methods of investigation. So it's community collaboration. You see everybody is working very intimately together, all of the stakeholders, social workers, researchers, resident staff, family administrators, virtually everyone who's got some stake in whatever this question is, everyone is involved, and the methods that are used are standardized methods so that these practices can be evaluated and then ultimately disseminated further than just the practice in which they began. Here's how this works. The partners and the researchers involved identify a practical problem that's of concern, such as can CNA safely administer medications to residents who have dementia who resist taking medications. In this case, again, the partners are everybody who's got some stake in the topic. This problem is converted into a question such as, well, how many medication errors occur and what can we do about it? And solutions are explored by what practitioners know, their experiences, what the researchers can bring through the literature, and then joint problem solving and discussion. Partners come together to ask these questions and identify possible solutions, one of which, for example, could be to help train the staff who administer medications in dementia practices. They agree, then the whole team agrees on solutions to try and how to implement them. Again, example being such as training the people who are administering medications in some dementia care techniques. The implementation occurs, the data are analyzed, and emerges. If things were found to be effective, terrific. If not, you go back, you think about a new solution, you implement it, you look at the data, and then ultimately you take this process over and over in kind of a continuous cycle of quality improvement. You can see on the next slide, which shows how community-based participatory research works. You can see all of the stakeholders are in the very center of the process, and it's an ongoing cycle of examining practices, understanding them, determine whether they're achieving the outcomes they intend to achieve, if not changing them, and if so, saying, terrific, what can we do next? The benefits of building evidence directly from practice, from what you know, are really many. This model appreciates that you have the expertise and you get to control the change that occurs in your practices. Obviously, organizational capacity is expanded. They learn how to set new goals, how to problem solve, develop new critical thinking skills, and become empowered to actually be the ones who are improving care, not people coming in from the outside. Research that is getting done is more relevant. It's more appropriate for the particular organization that is doing it. The practice being done is grounded in the real world of care provision, and successful practices are much more likely to be maintained because they've already been developed from what's happening there. And then ultimately, the social work benefits when these successful practices that were the ground up become shared with everyone. And then, of course, the real benefit, the most important benefit, is that resident care and outcomes are improved. So, where can you find research partners? There's colleges and universities near you. It's pretty simple to reach out because they're often looking for organizations with which they can work. Conferences and meetings, you can connect with people who have done projects or know of people who are doing projects. You, colleagues and friends, you can talk to about, have they had research partners? And a little bit self-serving, you also might find some research partners on a webinar. One knows. So here's where the rubber hits the road. Implementing some of these new evidence-based practices or helping to study the practices you're currently doing, there's absolute considerations that need to be kept in mind from an organizational perspective and an implementation perspective. Because if you don't keep those things in mind, then at best what you have is a best idea and not a best practice that's going to be put in practice or evaluated. So at this point, I will be turning the microphone over to my colleagues. First to Elsie Norton, who will talk about the organizational perspective, and then later Kim Broucksou will talk about the implementation perspective. Kim?
Thank you, Sheryl. As you now know, we represent Carolina Meadows in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. We serve over 700 residents with just shy of 400 staff members. Our continuing care retirement community is on about 166 acres. We serve residents in independent living, assisted living, skilled care, and we have a wonderful memory support residence as well. I about 2.5 years, and before that, worked for a multi-site CCRC organization. I served as president and CEO of a home care entity, worked with 6 home care agencies, and established a hospice while I was with that organization. And I served as managing director of their Gerontologic Research Institute. Now, please don't be confused here. I have a background in research, but the organization wanted an institute, so I did research on research institutes across the country. Was able to establish one for the organization. So that's where I began to really have quite an interest in research as it pertained to long-term care. And before that, I served 7 years as a nursing home administrator. I think that's really very important here because I understand the environments in which you're working. So talk about that a little bit. What are the benefits of doing research? Let's start with your community or your nursing center. Some of you are for-profit. Some of you may be not-for-profit. And if not-for-profit, you know the term social accountability. It's important for not-for-profit nursing homes simply because giving back to the community is a part of a way for you to retain your tax-exempt status. Now, that may not mean a great deal to you in the position you have, but it's very important to your organization overall. Another area is marketing. If you participate in a research study that's a very positive one, you can get some notoriety for your organization. Very good to have great outcomes published and have your name attached to those. The other part might be that you may have residents who support the value of research. You may not. It really depends on where you are and from where you draw your resident base. Chapel Hill, you may know, we have quite a number of universities. We have a lot of retired professors. and doctors who are in our particular community, and they really do value research. They believe that we should be participating, and of course, having that captive audience in a continuing care community or a nursing center that might be a single site that some of you may be representing is really, really important. Industry as a whole. Anytime we can improve the care and the services that we're providing for our elders, everybody wins. There are many, many techniques that have been perfected in order to enhance the quality of life for our residents. And of course, person-centered care and culture change are buzz phrases, if you will, that really speak to changing the way that we are providing care and services across the continuum. As a nursing home administrator, I must say that enhancing the reputation of your center is really important. I know when I served as a nursing home administrator, there was never anyone out there who said, "Oh, I want to come to your place. Pick me, and let me come live with you." Because we really do have a very challenging history in long-term care. And if you've been in the business for any length of time, you know that, and you'll know we need to change that. So research is one way of making that happen. So let's talk about the process a little bit. We go back one, the process. Okay, we're going to talk about the process. What are the referral sites? I think it's important for you and your organization to know what may be in your community. Some areas that someone is seeking to do some projects or learn some more and come into your organization, and you can seek those out. Typically, they will find you, but it's always good for you to make a connection with them as well. It could be a college, university, you just never know. So who's the point person? Well, I hate to say it, but it could be you. The entity has to have someone that they can talk to and decide whether or not a study is appropriate. They need someone who can organize the players in the project, those who will participate, those who will make it happen. Now, you never know. It could be your administrator, your director of nursing, or as I say, it could be the social worker. And I say that simply because you know the players, you know the people, you know the residents, you know their family members, you know the staff, you know what's going on in the organization, and you know a bit about the care needs of the residents to know if they can participate. What happens with the review? Let's say someone contacts you from one of your local referral sites. One of the things that you would want to do, assuming you are the point person, find out if in fact the study is mission compatible. Many are not-for-profit, many are faith-based, and it's important to look at your mission and make sure that the study is relevant. Let's say that the outcome is an important activity or an important study for the researcher. Let's use, for example, someone wants to study the effects of subacute care in long-term care. Well, what if you don't do subacute care? If you don't have residents coming in with tracheotomies or IVs or ventilators, maybe that's not the study for you, and you need to refer them down the street. What about resource requirements? Staff do they need to participate? How many residents do they need? What are the care needs of those people? What disqualifies residents from participating? Of course, what are space issues? There are a lot of resources that are wrapped up in a study, and you may not know what they are. Now, the players for a moment. We just talked about the point person. Now, remember, you're the point person for me today, so you can't give that to somebody else right now. What else? Well, you've got administrative staff. Now, if you happen to be a single site, that administrative staff may not be very deep. You may have an administrator, a director of nursing, possibly an executive director, but someone will need to review a study after you have said, this sounds good. Maybe a part of a regional chain, be a regional director of some sort who might want to review a study once you say it sounds good. In our case, we also have a research committee, and I recommend you do the same. Our research committee consists of 3 of our independent living residents. Now, they all remain anonymous because they know people in this community and in the universities, and we don't want them to be accused of not accepting studies and ruining their own reputation. But you have that. So I recommend to you that you look at your resident base and see if there are people living in the nursing home as residents who might participate. Many of them are more willing and able to do that. If you're part of a group, you may have a regional participant, someone who knows the value of research or maybe has done some. Again, it might be a board member. I have to make the assumption that most, if not all of you, have some type of a governing board. So involving them in a research project would help a great deal, help them to understand more of what's going on in the community, and help tie the organization to the community at large. The guidelines are going to be a little bit different. It may be for a pilot study. It may be that someone is looking just to get a grant, and Sheryl mentioned that. It could be early on. It may take a couple of years, but you need to have a letter of support if someone wants to seek a grant for a study. If it's a normal study, you want a brief proposal of that study that outlines the purpose, the participants. Who is it that they need to participate to make the study work? What outcomes? What type of data collection will they be doing? Really important, because let's say that they want information from an electronic health record and you don't have that yet. You talk about that. How are they going to collect their data? Board approvals. And Kim's going to talk about that a little bit more because she's done that. But the university will have to have some board approvals, and that way you know that the study has gone through a complete vetting, if you will. Consent forms. We all know how difficult they are, but how important. Consent forms. There's a policy in your community, I know, dealing with HIPAA, and it may not be easy to get consent forms. Some of your residents are able to give consent. Others, you'll have to work through the personal representatives to do that. It's important for you to know that up front. The reforms could be in the form of a flyer that just has a few numbers at the bottom, or it could be something that they ask you to give to each particular resident. So we're going to start now talking about the initial screening. This is you. This is when you're looking at a proposal. You write to say, thanks, but no thanks. Now, as a point person, you make that determination. What kinds of projects would you say no to? Well, I would use the example that it may not be marketing friendly. I'll give you an example. Someone wanted to study the frequency of resident anger with family members for moving them into a nursing home. They wanted to study the favoritism of discharge planners as they place individuals into nursing homes. Now, I want to think about that. There are huge implications to your marketing efforts there. And it's very easy for you to be the one to say, we don't want any part of this. So your review may be an initial screening, but it's a very important one. What would you do? Well, actually, you want to inform your research committee, and I'm assuming there would be a committee, be it very small, but there are some people you would want to contact. The reason you want to let them know is that if someone on the outside says, I actually wanted to study thus and so, and your community said no, and I know you're on the research committee, be sure that if you have said no from the beginning, that your research committee members are aware of that. What if you yes? Sounds good. Let's look at it. What you want to do is make sure you email or send your guidelines for your community to the researcher. You would forward the proposal to the research committee, and you then be the one to begin contacting administrative staff and say, there's something that may be coming, prepare yourselves. It gets to the administrative staff. This is more of a general screening. And be, as I say, someone regional or someone corporate, or it could be your administrator, your director of nursing, whomever it happens to be for your community. They might say thanks, but no thanks. So what is it that would make that small group of people say no? Well, it's possible that it's too staff or resource intensive. Let's say that someone comes and wants to treat a particular care issue and it requires 7 hours of staff training per person before the intervention. I tell you, that's a real life study request that we denied because we would have had to put additional staff or hire agency to cover just to prepare the staff for the intervention. It was way, way too staff intensive. Say that they wanted to better understand hearing, but they have to have a soundproof room on site. Well, excuse me, but good luck with that. That might be another administrative reason to say thank you, but this isn't the place. Again, I want to make sure that the administrative staff gets back to you, and either the administrator or you inform the research committee. If they say, yes, this sounds good, we move on, you inform the research committee, and you send them all the materials and await their decision. Now it's at the research committee for specific screening. Sounds like a lot, but this does not have to happen in a long period of time. These procedures take place in email rather quickly. So what would the research committee say? Thanks, but no thanks. People who have a little bit of a background, if not an intensive background in research, and they say it's way too complicated. For instance, let's measure the impact of exercise, nutrition, and medication assessments on risk factors associated with certain medical conditions. Well, this might have passed muster with your administrative staff, but you do all that on site, but a researcher with a research background is going to know that's way too complicated for most nursing centers. If that's the case, then they would say, I don't think we should do that. It goes back through the administrative staff, back to the point person who says, okay, not appropriate. If they yes, they would then notify the administrative staff, the person would notify the researcher, and the meetings and the timeline would begin. So see from the organizational perspective that it's a bit complicated. If you have a procedure that you work out in your organization, it can be so wonderful for you and that organization. But there's a lot of balancing. The research, the researcher, the project, whatever it is, the resources, meaning staff, residents, the environment, could be family members, a whole host of people. So Kim's going to talk about how you make that balance.
Okay, thank you, Elsie. Yeah, my name is Kimberly Broucksou, and I am the Cognitive Care Director at Carolina Meadows. To tell you a little bit about that position, I actually reach everybody in the community. We have 700 residents, so I'm looking at supporting people in our skilled nursing, in assisted living, and in independent living. I do things, and I also do program development as well. I have over 10 years of experience in long-term care. I've worked at Carolina Meadows for 2.5 years as the Cognitive Care Director. I also have some experience there as a social worker in the past. I have experience at a freestanding Medicare Medicaid nursing home as well, and I also have some hospice experience. Interestingly, I took a break from social work, which sometimes social workers do, and was in research for 5 years. So during that time, I got acquainted with clinical research. I was responsible for doing recruitment of patients into a study. I was responsible for actually doing some of the program management of that study. And I also did some practice implementation when it came to looking at some of our best practices and how certain medical practices could implement those practices. So I have an interesting background in kind of both social work and research. I'll tell you a little bit about some of the projects that are going on at Carolina Meadows to give you a little bit of a flavor of what we are into. We have of wonderful resources here in the area from UNC, University of North Carolina, but we also have Duke not far away. So we do get bombarded quite a bit with regards to research. With 700 residents on campus, there are many researchers who do seek us out. We have been sought out by a researcher at Duke to look at a feeding study. And with regards to dementia care, the researcher wanted to come in and do a couple of different techniques with some of our patients that have dementia. You might be familiar with these techniques. They're through TIPA Snow, but like a hand-over-hand feeding technique, a hand-under-hand feeding technique. Look at whether the residents would respond better to one or the other, and look at it also in terms of whether those techniques are better than just having somebody feed a resident. So we looked at this study and we thought, yeah, this is something that's interesting, and we've kind of initiated that study. We also have a caregiver study through UNC, and that study's been going on for many, many years. And we will refer people to that researcher when we feel like there is a caregiver, usually family caregiver, who could benefit from maybe a little bit more support. And this researcher will then contact that person, get authorization, and basically do interviews with that person, get information about their caregiver stress and what activities they're doing with regards to that. Another study that we're looking into right now, which is through actually a company who develops training, and they're wanting to look at the training modules that they have created to make sure that they are training people properly. What they would like to do is recruit some of our staff to go through the training module, doing a pre-test, and having the person do the intervention, the training, and then doing a post-test. So that's another training we're looking at. And we also have a mouth care study training done through UNC. That is very much a practice-based evidence training where the practices have been laid out. This seems to be good practice, but we're in the process of trying to implement that study. How do we take all of these wonderful practices and figure out how the staff can implement them with the residents? How do we train the staff? Where do we keep the supplies? What supplies do we keep? How do we make these decisions? A lot of decisions go into trying to implement a practice like this. So we're working closely with the researchers as we implement this program to say, well, this worked, this didn't, this is what's going on. We have some wonderful surprises sometimes. Things work out really well, and other times it's like, whoa, here's a hiccup. So those are some of the things that we are working on with some of the local researchers. Now we look at the benefits of some of this research. I definitely think that we see a lot of the care that residents are receiving is increased when they get touched by the research that's out there and the experts that come to our organization. So it can benefit the residents and the care that they receive, benefit the staff as well, increasing their skills, increasing the way that they do things. I've definitely seen this with the mouth care study. The few people that we have trained with these techniques have just eyes have been opened. So you can really benefit, the staff can really benefit from that kind of research. Interestingly, I do think that residents just be exposed to different people, having researchers or research assistants come on to the site and talk to them. maybe interview them, maybe, they go through a survey. Having them do different relationships with different people is definitely a benefit. Families can see an effort in the care that is given. They can see differences sometimes, and especially if staff are talking about it and talking about it with families, you can tell that families are happy with the fact that, wow, they're really paying attention to some of this stuff. You can get free resources. Free resources in the form of staff. Sometimes expert staff come on board with the feeding program. For instance, they were actually going to send research assistants to actually do this feeding for 3 days in a row. And these people were practitioner students. They were, students going through school. So that would be great to give the staff a little break and hopefully allow the staff to sit back and take a look at some of the techniques that they were using too, and learn something from them. The products as well, with the mouth care initiative that we have going on. I have quite a few mouth care products in my office right now, including wonderful toothbrushes. So you get exposed to different products, you get exposed to different things, some of them free, some of them not free, but I think that's definitely a benefit. And this can be an activity for staff. There was a study in our assisted living facility not long ago, and they made it an activity. They brought in food and said, hey, come on down and talk to these people, and so it was something that, was new and different people and different questions, and it was good for the residents to go through that. I think just having a heightened understanding of, wow, there's research out there. There's research out there on what we do, and it's saying, one thing or the other. It's saying we should do this or we should do that. I think put in front of staff sometimes is a good thing for them to kind of revisit that and say, yeah, to think about, are we doing this the best way we can? So the challenges, and I'm sure I don't have to probably labor this much, but the challenges often are time. Time when it comes to my time in coordinating efforts like this, it can be quite time-consuming, especially when you might have to send in some reports, or, figure out who's doing what. The juggling of staff time to have staff maybe have to cover the floor while I pull somebody off to do some special training, having staff come in and have to be paid extra to do extra training, and then letting the DON know, letting the AON know. So there's a lot of juggling that goes around with something like this, and it does certainly take time. And the timing of projects is not always ideal, especially, I'm sure I don't have to say it, that if you are in your survey window, worrying about a research project at that time is probably not what, the first thing on your mind. Interestingly, too, research can take an awfully long time. The thing of recruiting patients always jive with our population and their lifetime sometimes. The feeding project that I'm so interested in having them start has been in process for probably 6 months, but because the researchers don't have the resources and don't have the research assistants to send to at this time, we are waiting and waiting. Now, I know I've gotten consent from some of the residents, but some of those residents have actually done it in that process, and so it's very interesting when you try to jive the research timing with our environment. And I think also have to take into account, too, that this is actually their home, and we don't want a whole lot of activity. Some activity can be good, but not all activity. So not a whole lot of activity. One thing that did come to mind when we looked at the feeding program, that these researchers wanted to come in with cameras. And we thought about that, and we said, gee, I can't imagine. They want to film these people getting their hand-over-hand techniques, and their hand-over-hand techniques. And we really made sure that it wasn't going to be intrusive. And the researchers were pretty sensitive to that. They had very, very small cameras that they could attach to a chair, and it could be fairly innocuous. Those are some things that you really want to think about and consider the fact that this is residents' home. And, you want to try and maintain that the best that you can. And I want to talk a little bit about the Institutional Review Board. I'm assuming that many of you have probably gone through, college and probably had to go through some sort of research project while you were there. You may remember that any research project that is sought out needs to be okayed by the Institutional Review Board of your university. So, what is that? That is an independent board of people who will look at every research project that comes across their desk to make sure that the human subjects within that project are being protected. What gives resident or researchers the right to do? A lot of times researchers will go to the Institutional Review Board and they will ask them for authorization to look at medical records. And a lot of times this is done prior to getting authorization from families or residents. This is often Institutional Review Boards will say, yes, you can go ahead and do that, only because it would be more an inconvenience for the residents or the families sometimes to have to understand what the inclusion and the exclusion criteria for that research project is. So the researcher might come to you and say, okay, I've got the Institutional Review Board has said that I can go ahead and look through your medical records. And social worker, you go, oh my gosh, are you kidding me? It doesn't feel right. You can have, I know myself in particular, you can get very protective about the residents in your home, and so having somebody sit down and scour through their medical records is daunting. But the Institutional Review Board will make sure that is taken into account, and that all the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted. And you'll take a look too at your HIPAA authorization. I bet we all have to have somebody, the resident of the family, sign a HIPAA authorization when they come into the organization. And if you take a good close look at that, you will find that there is some language in there that refers to research projects. So, as far as just my responsibilities go, as I said earlier, I am supposed to be champion, or I am often the champion when it comes to these people kind of look to me and say, okay, what's happening next? I will do a pretty job of trying to communicate with residents and families about what is happening with the projects and what we are requiring them, answering any questions, that kind of thing. Communicating with staff is huge, whether you're having to juggle staff for, to get coverage so you can pull somebody off the floor, or to do this or to do that. That is a big one. Making sure your director of nursing, your administrator, your ADON, they all know what's going on in that project. And providing training, whatever training may be needed. And then, a big part of my job too is just communicating with the researchers and letting them know how it's going, what bumps we have. Somebody wants to pull out a study, somebody doesn't want to do this. So being a conduit between the researchers and the facility. And just reporting successes and failures, definitely. So, yeah, that's kind of where I am. It looks like we are probably at almost 3 o'clock. So,
So thank you all for attending on behalf of myself, Sheryl, and Kim and Elsie. And at this point, we welcome any questions or comments.
If you'd like to type in your question or comment, I'll read it for everybody to hear. This is Mercedes speaking. And there was a question that came in, so I'm going to start out with that. When we sent a question, directed it to Kim or Elsie, do you ever want to initiate your own research? And so if you had an idea for a research project as a staff member, how do you proceed?
We'd love to, but we have not had that experience at this point. But that's where, even though it has not happened with us, if you find there is an opportunity, something you want to study, that's where it's really important that you have a connection to the referral sites I mentioned. Have a relationship with the universities. Have a relationship with a hospital that may be doing research. I'm not quite sure what you may have in your area, but that's where you begin to brainstorm. We are very closely aligned with the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and of course Duke University being very close as well. If you know individuals and they begin asking questions and you sit down and have coffee and say, hey, we've got this going on, we have some special programming going on, and we'd like very much to partner with you to set something up. Now, it still would require a lot of work on the part of the university to put the study together, but you could be instrumental, and I would encourage that, absolutely.
If I could just add, this is Sheryl, the community-based participatory research, that is the right way to do it, for it to start within the community and say, we want to study this, we want to understand this. Researchers, can you help us with this? And, you know, just the whole fact of reciprocity with all that you've done with Duke and UNC and any organizations, if someone has come into your setting to do their research, I think that there's very much been a tone of reciprocity set up for them to help you do your research.
This is Mercy. If you're a staff member too, and you had an idea, you can always invite a potential colleague to come and do an in-service in your facility, and that way you get a sense of what this researcher's perspective is, whether or not you think you could work with this person, you know, how interested or knowledgeable they are about the setting. And that's just a real concrete thing to do. Invite somebody in to give a talk about something that you're interested in, and then together talking about what you're seeing right there on the ground in terms of what needs to be researched. Because what the researcher should do is then turn to the literature and see, has anybody written about this? Do we have any insights that we can look at? Because not everything needs to result in a research project. Sometimes other people have done studies that might be useful to you. So, and the nice thing that I find here at the University of Iowa is our library resources are fabulous, but it's open to the community. If you're in person, it's open to the community, but we can't use all our databases and things like that. So having a connection with a university person gives you access through them to their library resources. I have a couple questions I'd just like to ask too while I'm waiting for other questions to come in. Intrigued by your comment about one of your research projects would require 7 hours of training for the nursing home staff to be part of the research project. I'm wondering, well, what if the grant paid for 7 hours of training? I mean, if the grant paid for the staff training, so it wasn't going to be an expense to the nursing home, would the nursing home consider that, or it's just too much to ask of the staff?
This is Kim, and I think that's actually a good thing to throw in the pot when you really start to look at it. At a point then you have to ask, are you going to require the staff to do that, or is this going to be voluntary? And if it's going to be voluntary, are you going to get enough interest? Now, interestingly, when you say that, the study that I have through what's called Healthcare Interactive, he's willing to pay our staff $50 to do this pre-test and go through a 2-hour module and then do a post-test. Sometimes they do actually throw in some money to do that. And I want to go back to him and say, yeah, we can do that, but there's a certain part of me that says, oh, I hope I have the staff that will be able, that'll step up to the plate and say, yeah, I want to do that. So there's more questions to ask. Are you going to require it, or is it going to be voluntary, or how many staff would be interested, that kind of thing.
And did you mention that the offer was for $15 or $50?
50. It was $50, 50. Pretty much 2 hours worth of, education. It was an internet module for the training. Mm-hmm.
All right. And I'm going to ask. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was thinking when someone asked about initiating your own research, and I was thinking of slide 28 that I just looked at. This community-based participatory research where Sheryl was talking about CNA safety and administering medications. And I'm just wondering if, since quality improvement and QAPI and everything is all kind of now being put out there, if the same kind of model could be used as a quality improvement and maybe have one of the UNC or Duke researchers help you plan it so it's a better quality improvement, or whether in some of what Kim's talking about, that it's not necessarily social research, but mouth care is so important to dignity. How getting the staff to really understand the holistic approach of doing this kind of thing to help your beneficiaries. So one could use this community-based participatory research for not just doing research, but maybe community plan, some improvement, and then two, how to help the staff understand how these topics are so important in the long run.
Yeah, this is Sheryl. I think that's a really important point, because really there's so many researchers, myself, but I'm just typical of many others, that we would like to use our skills to actually help make a difference. And we don't necessarily know the right areas in which to make a difference. And if we don't start, with the need that's already being felt, then again, we've set ourselves on a 63-year research career when very little has happened. So I think having organizations think about how can the researcher help them, unless there's those cases where the organization already knows the evidence and the practices they want to change, but people should feel empowered to go out to any researchers they know and say, this is what we would like to do. Cassidy, could you help us with this?
While waiting for other questions to come in, I did get Dr. Robin Boniface from Arizona, social work research there, and she's just letting people know that, I'll just read a message. Attendees might be interested in participating in a study on the family experience of resident-to-resident aggression. Robin Boniface is interviewing family members who have had a resident who is either an instigator of resident-on-resident aggression or a victim of it, to learn what the experience is like for them. So if you are interested in Robin Boniface's study, Robin, I'm wondering if you could send something to our listserv, and then the on today's call are probably also on the listserv. If you're not on our Nursing Home Social Work Network listserv and you'd like to be, you can do that through the University of Iowa School of Social Work website, or just evaluation. If you're interested in being contacted by Robin Boniface, to learn more about her research project, please put that in your evaluation form, and then I'll pass that on to Robin Boniface. All right, let's see. Okay. I think there's something else. Is it feasible to solicit assistance of college students to include high school students when conducting research projects at no cost to the nursing home as part of the learning experience? That's a question that came in from Emma. I'll repeat it. Is it feasible to solicit assistance of college students to include high school students when conducting research?
So, Sheryl, I certainly understand the college student part of that question. I'm not 100% clear about the high school part. I hadn't even thought to mention that earlier. That is, many college students in psychology courses, social work courses, especially social work courses, students have to take research courses, are looking for projects to conduct. And not only then would they be conducting the research, but they usually have got an instructor or a mentor, someone giving them guidance. So be it a twofer. You could get a student who's doing this for their project, also knowing that they're getting the good guidance. Quite understand where that high school part fits in. Maybe you understood that part better. I'm sorry, I don't.
Well, I think the question might be when college students or staff are conducting a study in a nursing home, why can't they include high school students too, so the high school students learn about conducting research?
That makes a good idea. Yeah.
I suppose one could do that. Yeah.
The only thing that as Kim here was talking about, is that the whole institutional review boards and the oversight, there's certainly for the protection of human subjects, there's sometimes some check balances that need to get put in place to make sure that it's okay for the student, for both or whoever it is, to look at the resident charts and whatnot. But usually there's no problem as long as the students get trained and there's standardized training that people have to get before they do research. So as long as all the earlier, Kim, all the T's are crossed and I's are dotted, it's wonderful to maximize the number of people who can be involved.
Good point. This is universities again, and when I've done research with local nursing homes and or assisted living centers, when I want to interview staff, usually I try to work it out that the staff is not working. So it's at the change of shift. If I can meet people before 3, before they go on the second shift, or as they're coming off the first shift, and do it set from work setting and their work duty. And I just mentioned that to those of you who are in nursing homes who might be thinking that being involved in research might just take away too much staff time. You can let the researcher know what your concern might be, and then the researcher should be able to help design a study that take that into consideration. So if you are concerned about burdening your staff, then things like interviewing staff outside of their regular times, compensating the staff, recognizing the staff in some way, or whatever it might take to make your facility feel better about it. Especially when people are submitting large grants, there could be like an honorarium system set up, or even a one-time payment to the nursing home that's participating in recognition of the extra effort that it takes to have researchers hanging around. That our speakers would like to say.
To follow up, to underscore that point that you made, Elsie talked about sometimes organizations are asked to write letters of support for researchers, and if your organization is asked that, that's a perfect time for you, again, if you're the point person, to think about, well, we'd be very interested in this, but if we were going to, then we would need X, Y, and Z from you, because then the researchers would know to include that in the budget right from the get-go. It gets back to all of this being a collaboration.
And also, if somebody asks for a letter of support, you can for a sample. Sometimes a nursing home administrator or a social worker or director of nursing has not been involved in research before and they don't know what is an appropriate letter of support. Any of those things, the researchers would be more than happy to sit down with you and talk with you about to lessen the burden, and that includes giving samples of different kinds of letters or whatever. To send a shout out to all of you who have already participated on collaborative research projects with nursing homes, assisted living, CCRC, and school of social work or colleges of nursing or any kind of researchers, because it's part of that helps build the knowledge base that influences people's attitudes about care, their behaviors related to care, and in the end, that's what's going to help make the end of oldhood an even more special time of life, is knowing how to better serve people at that stage of life. Thank you for your time, everybody, and the recording will be posted in about 24 hours. Bye.
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 Bye.